The Barograph step. The vault sat where the bluff dipped behind the science building, a square of poured concrete sunk into a better square of sand. When I started, they told me it was safer than it looked and not as important as it sounded. "We send data to people who know what to do with it," the department chair said, tapping the glass where the drum made its slow lap. "Your part is to keep things from overheating and turn it off before a thunderstorm." I kept it from overheating. I turned it off before a thunderstorm. At night, I kept my lunch in the little fridge down there and leaned back in the rolling chair with the squeak I kept meaning to oil. The chair made a noise that sounded like a creak in a house, which once you heard it made you think of the old houses around Lido Quarter, where the screen doors were sized wrong and the wind talked through them all night long. On paper, my title was Facilities Technician. In practice, it meant keys and learning the rhythm of machines. The vault had three main sounds: the UPS with its bee hum, the fan that never entirely settled even after I cleaned the bearings, and the pen on the smoked drum scratching soft as a pencil over a grocery list. When a gust came in from the water, you could see the band get fat with ocean noise, a lazy stack of saw teeth that meant the wind had pushed the waves up and they were talking to the land. I liked the straightforwardness of it. The pen did what the earth did. The rest of us rounded it off and made it legible. It was a job you could do alone if you didn't mind the company of steady things. I liked the steady things. Before this, I unloaded semis for the distribution branch out by the highway, the one that buzzed like a hive even past midnight. When they downsized, they kept the kids who could sprint boxes over their heads and tried to retrain the rest of us in customer-facing roles. I did 3 months at the counter and learned it was easier to move a 12-foot mirror through a narrow stairwell than it was to smile at a person whose package hadn't come. The vault didn't need smiling. It wanted wiping and checking and the finger on a breaker when thunder rolled in. I could do that. The vault was half buried to keep the temperature down. In summer, the concrete lifted heat even when the sun was on its back. In winter, the room had its own weather. If you sat long enough, your hands stiffened and your gums felt cold. The steel door swelled after rain and you had to put your shoulder to it. The hallway outside smelled like a mop and paper dust, because the geology lab down the hall kept its rock saw running at odd hours, and stone pulp had a way of moving into any breeze. The first off thing came on a Tuesday, late, in that notch of quiet after the last cleaners had finished, and before the graveyard plow came through and knocked the dumpsters into the curb. I had the door cracked 4 inches because the fan was acting up again, and if I learned anything from working with old things, it was to give them air when they asked for it. The drum showed that soft stack from the ocean, nothing to look at. Then the band thinned. It thinned like a belt pulling tight, and the pen ran in a hair until the line looked like a lifted hair laid right on the paper. It ran that way for a good minute, and I knew something in the digitizer had hiccuped. I reached for the cable, and the pen lifted and sat down again, not in a spike the way it does when you bump the table, but a little hop, like a hand taking the pen and setting it with a second mind. Letters came. If you didn't know cursive, you might have missed it. It wasn't calligraphy. It was the stiff kind of block a person learns after a wrist break, careful and slow. HOLD, space enough between to breathe. I pushed the chair back and laughed out of startle more than humor. To make letters with a mechanical pen, you needed a machine to move in 2 ways at once. You needed a bad bearing and jitter and a miracle. I checked the digitizer output on the monitor. The numbers sat there polite. I told myself it was the pen bending to a scratch in the drum, and the scratch made a pattern the way you see faces in a knot of wood if you restuck facing the same board a while. While I watched, the little boxy printer woke. It had the old ribbon still because the grant that redid the digitizer didn't bother to kill the theater of the place, the drum, and the printout, and the way students like to think of earthquakes as handwriting. The dot heads chattered along their track and made a line of caps, then a noise like a cough, then more caps. Do not answer. The clack went out like a tap running dry. The ribbon jerked and that was it. We didn't have annotation turned on. I knew because I was the one who had to turn it off when the last grad student left in May and a PT instructor took over the summer lab. All it would write was dates and sample rates. The room had no opinion about the world. It watched and drew lines. I put my palm to the steel door, same as I would to a truck hood in winter, to see if it had run lately. Maybe the air in the hallway had warmed up. It was cool against my hand. The kind of cool that feels like not your temperature, like there's a difference of opinion between you and the metal. I held there longer than made sense, and I got the hot and cold trick you get when you hold an ice cube long enough. Heat blooming in response to the cold so you don't know which one you feel. On the monitor, the trace kicked up wide and tidy. If you've watched enough of them, you know the way a certain bump means a long way off and a different shape means closer. The solver tried to throw a depth on it and put a line of dashes where numbers should go. It was a laughable thing, dashes where the Earth was supposed to have a center. I checked the barograph. It had dropped a thumb width. Nothing dramatic. A breath in, like when a kid fills his cheeks before he goes down in the pool. There was a time of night way things became more themselves. The hum, the fan, the reach of the light into the far corners where the washed concrete looked rougher. I could say that I saw what I saw next and I'd be half telling the truth. The pen ran one long ripple that looked like a hallway if a hallway had a frequency. The line narrowed then in a string like footsteps not so much heard as counted by a person holding their breath. After a single word, delivered, the printer shook itself empty of the word and stopped again. I logged it because that's what I do. Logging is what makes a thing shareable. You write it down and the world says it happened even if the world laughs when you tell it. Date, time, wind from the south at 12 by the airport feed. Migrated ocean noise thinning at 2:47 a.m. Event not typical. I went to put the magnitude because if you catch something you put a number to it, even if the number is guesswork. The field refused numbers. The cursor sat blinking as if embarrassed for me. Then the box filled itself as if slow poured from a pitcher. It put my street in there instead. I cleared it, typed a sensible placeholder. The street returned. I didn't like that. I didn't like that at all. There are jokes machines pull that are just numbers, and there are jokes machines pull that get too specific. I cleared it again. I typed just a single 0. The street came back, and this time the font stuttered weird, like a hand that thinks too hard about how letters should sit on the line. By morning, the pen had gone back to its fence pickets. The paper curled as smoke dried on it. I pulled it off, wrote Tuesday and the time and a question mark in the margin, and put it on the counter with a little stone I kept there to keep pages from walking off under the fan. It was a river stone from a place upstate where the slope turns a stream into whisper water and the sand smells like iron. I liked the weight of it. The drum made its slow, patient lap. For the first time since I started, I closed the steel door with the shoulder push you use to seal a stubborn thing and felt like I'd left something breathing inside. That afternoon I drove up my street slow, though there was no reason to. The mailboxes stood there like they always do, with little red flags the kids like to lift and slap back down. Mine had a nick in the paint from a winter where the plow took off half of it in a storm. I backed into the space I rent behind the old barber, the one who kept the pole because his father had kept the pole, and there was a story in that, even if nobody told it. The flag on my box had been left up. When I pressed it down, it stayed there like a lid closed on a saucepan, stubborn and right. It wasn't a thought yet. It was a feeling like when you reach for a tool and your hand knows it isn't tea where it belongs, even before your eyes confirm it. After work, I cooked what I always cook when the day floats around me. Eggs on stale bread with pepper. The pepper bottle had a broken lid, and pepper came heavy at first and then not at all, and that stop-start felt like the printer had felt. That cough and then clarity. The eggs were fine. The bread made a scrape on my teeth that felt louder than it should. The fridge hummed in that low inside my head way. I watched the condensation on the window run a straight track like it meant to trace something all the way to the sill, and then it stopped right above the latch and refused to move further. It made me think of when I was a kid and we'd make coin rubbings by laying paper over a quarter and dragging the pencil sidewise until a face appeared like it was climbing out of a fog. You end up paying attention to how much pressure you use. Too hard and you get darkness, too soft and you get whisper. It was like that. Everything was the same, but a hand was pressing a little harder. The next shift I kept the steel door closed. Some part of me was superstitious enough to guess that if I gave outside air less to do, it would do less. The vault had that cold that sits at your ankles and makes your bones feel like hollow places. I wore my jacket and put the sleeves over my hands like a kid would. The drum printed neat, adventuresome as a heart tracing in a healthy person. I oiled the chair. The squeak turned into a different squeak that would bug me until I adjusted to it. Around the same time as the night before, though not the same because I caught myself looking at the clock a little earlier, like a person trying not to check a healing wound, the band contracted, not to hair this time, to a fingernail. HOLD again, even more careful, as if that stiff hand had loosened a little. I rolled my tongue in my mouth and tasted the cold metal taste you get at the dentist when they put a tool against your gum and your whole face tells you it is a little dangerous. Do not answer, the printer said, not in a shout, in a professional tone. After no sputter, clean, I put my palm to the steel door. It was cool but less cool than the day before, the way a person's forehead feels when they left the hospital and they almost themselves, but you can still tell their heat isn't at their old heat. There was also a movement I can only compare to a draft that, close to the floor. It ran past my knees and settled behind me. I turned too fast, and the chair bumped the counter, and the stone ID set there moved an inch and rotated. I stood there feeling like a man in an empty church who heard a shoe scuff and told himself the building was settling. If you work with instruments even a short time, you learn how they behave when people are around. You start to read little noises as signatures. That night I heard footsteps in the quiet, in the way the pen drew itself thin and then regular, as if someone walked down a hallway, the line tracking not noise, but the spaces between the noise, counting them off like the serious counting I used to do when I lifted. For the first time since I started, I thought about the instruction, as if it were meant for me and not just a joke printed by an old machine. I stood very still. I didn't answer. The not answering had a taste to it, the way keeping your mouth shut does. A copper taste like blood that isn't blood. After a while, the barograph took one more step down, the way a person will sigh after they've been holding in something. The printer typed "delivered" again and made a crisp tear. In the morning, when the day shift in the main building pushed through with coffee and day voices and the dry click of office shoes, the lab director sent a note down to me. Could I please check the HVAC on the 3rd floor because the biology cold room had gone to ambient and a faculty member had put a sign on the door that read, "Do not open." I went up there with my meter and my keys, and sure enough, the compressor had kicked itself off sometime in the night like a tired heart. The cold room was full of mason jars with things that looked like pale winter salads and a smell that made the back of my tongue feel like I had metal shavings on it. The sign sat on the door in block letters, and when I read it, I felt a little childish, wanting to put my finger on the pen marks to see if the ink would smudge, like fresh bruises. While I ran the reboot protocol, I could hear the building's innards talk. Fluorescents buzzed when the motion sensor thought about waking them, even before the light came. Somewhere, a compressor clicked and groaned like an old man getting off the couch. A guy from custodial named Rob came by, saw me on my knees, and made a face like he always did, the face that said, "On our knees again." He was a good union man and didn't talk if he didn't have to. He leaned on the door jamb and blew on his coffee and said, "You hear about the advisory?" "What advisory?" "They got a notice from county about the smell by the inlet. Said don't swim, some kind of upwelling. Sulfur. Folks call it rotten egg, but it isn't that to me. Smells like a battery." "Battery?" I said. "Yeah. I told my brother to stay off the flats. He said I was bossing him. That'll be on me if he comes home sick." "It's just the tide kicking up old stuff," I said. "They said that last summer." "Sure," he said. "Old stuff keeps getting older." The cold room settled into itself like a couch does after you sit down on it and mean to get up again and done tea. I left the sign on the door because you done tea go against faculty even when they aren't tea there. Walking back down to the vault, I made a list in my head. Tighten the belts on the second air handler. Tell the chair the vault ran fine. Ask the chair for that new filter. The list fell apart when I was halfway down the last flight because the light over the landing flickered twice in a spaced way and then held. You ever get the sense that a hallway holds its breath when you step into it? I did. I was with it quick as anything to call myself foolish, like when a dog barks at nothing and you tell the dog to hush because you don't want to see what he sees. That night I brought the squeak chair to another position on the tile because I'd started to think the squeak had counted something, which is the kind of dumb thought a man has when he's slept bad. I had slept bad. I'd awoken without waking at 2 and 3 and 4 with the sense I was late for a test I hadn't studied for. The kitchen smelled like pepper, even though all I'd done was rinse the pan. My appetite hung around, but it was thin like a stray. The drum started the same. The hum said we were a ship where the ship should be. Engines fine, water level. Some minutes before the wrong time, I took the little stone and put it in my pocket. I don't know why. I stood by the door with my palm over the latch like a man in a house that's expected to get a delivery. The line from a certain phrase already making itself in my head, like a groove in a record. That was new about it, the groove. It set you to waiting. HOLD. Do not answer. The printhead took it on like work it had to do. When the thin quiet came, I kept my hand off the latch. The movement past my knees was almost a comfort now, the way the draft says a door has sealed and you have a boundary. I thought about saying, "Who is that?" Not to the room, but to the shape the room makes when it acts like a person. I didn't say it. The instruction sat heavy between my shoulder blades like a hand. Delivered came, clean. The printer made its end-of-line teeth noise and drew the paper taut as if to wait for whatever came next. When I logged it, the field filled with more than my street. It put a number, and the number was the right number for my box. You would think that'd be the place where a man draws a line, calls someone, tells someone who can either laugh at him or explain it with a mouthful of sensible tools. I sat there and looked at the number, and my first thought, God help me, was that I had better put the flag down on the box before I went to bed, or the kids would think I hadn't tea collected. I watched my hand put the stone back on the paper as if that did something real. The next day, my neighbor, a woman with a toddler and a job in the medical billing office in town, asked me if I had smelled the water. She was friendly the way people are when they want to be sure you aren't going to complain about their kid, oil leak, or their weekend drum practice. "The tap is off," she said. "It's fine. They said it's fine, but it doesn't smell fine." "Like the ocean," I said, which wasn't true. It smelled like a battery left in a drawer too long, the one you test with your tongue, even though you said you wouldn't anymore. I told her to run it until it ran cold because I remembered something about old pipes and the first run of water moving things along. Her kid toddled with a sippy cup like a worker carrying a bucket from one job to the next. The flag on her mailbox was up, though she hadn't put it up. She put it down and laughed in that way you do when you correct an object and it doesn't fight you for once. At the vault that evening, the chair had a new squeak. I found the squeak. It was a little meaner, higher, like a gate hinge that hadn't been oiled. I put the oil on it and overdid it, and the chair glided with the bored silence of a person who refuses to move at all until they are sure you want them to. The lab director had left me a note asking me to put a fan in the vestibule because students were fainting, coming from the outside and hitting the indoor heat, then cooling down too fast in the lab. It went in a list, and I did it. The fan chopped the air and made a chopped shadow on the wall. We were all working normal work. I started telling myself that. At 2:47, the vault did its thing. HOLD. The barograph took a small step down. It had been stepping all week, and it was almost a straight line by now, a hand over a drum skin pressing a little more at time. The printer said, "Do not answer." I stood to the side of the door and put my hand on the cinder block wall instead. The block had a cold each block keeps, like a memory of the day they were poured, and the summer heat was around them, and it wants to live differently than it lives in a room. The footsteps you couldn't hear came and went, delivered. This time the drum didn't pick its usual noise after. It made the kind of line I'd seen in archived prints from a quarry blast upstate, a line that says a lot of force in not very much time. It made a little ugly shape you'd mistake if you've watched enough of it. I looked at the monitor, and the solver tried to reach toward a hypocenter and gave up. It laid down a line of dashes, like the person who sold you the car, telling you the previous owner had done all the maintenance and not having the papers to show. I told myself that human error had been coded into the system the way a whisper gets into a family story, and nobody ever knows where it came from. A security guy named Morrow, a young one, stuck his head in the door and said, "We got to close at 9. He said it like he was giving me a break, not like he was the bearer of anything. "Advisory about the air. People getting headaches. They've sent out a text." I didn't get the text. "New system," he said. "They're trying a new system." "We're always trying a new system," I said. "They're saying to keep windows shut overnight," he said. "That's not a big ask, is it?" "It isn't," I said. The air in the vault made my nose feel dry, and not dry at once. I nodded, thinking if I got the vault sealed in the next hour, it would keep its little climate track and do what it does, and I could come back at 5 when they let us open again. The idea of leaving the vault for the hours when the printer liked to speak made something in me hard, with a stupid superstition a man my age shouldn't to have. While I pulled new paper onto the drum, I caught myself thinking about how you fold a letter. The line from the printer sat on the counter, "Do not answer," like any sign in any civilization for any hazard, a sentence the world had made easy for our brains to hold. I folded that into 3 without thinking, and the paper creased exactly where you see decrease a letter if you meant to slide it under a thick door. It was a household action, and it made me feel a kind of warm shame, as if this had been a thing we did in the house where I grew up, and I had forgotten it until now. By the time I crossed the lot, the advisory had grown into something you could feel. People moved faster than they needed to. The campus had a smell that wasn't right, even for a place perched on saltwater. Somebody knocked over a trash can, and a teacher I recognized had her hand on her throat like she could sense the shape of her breath. I slept in my clothes with my window shut, and the smell of the room feeling like the smell you get when you paint, and you forget that it will dry clear, and for a while all you see is wet. Sometime after midnight, before 2, my phone flickered with a picture my neighbor had taken without words. The picture was of my door, and there was a slip of paper tilted under it. The paper had a crease right where you decrease it if you meant to post it to a man so he couldn't miss it. She had sent that because she's the kind of neighbor who doesn't like other people is business, which is a helpful kind of person if you get in trouble or if you need to feel seen without anybody big dealing it. I didn't get up. I laid there and had the thought that if I didn't move, the letter would not fully arrive. That was the kind of half-crazy bargain a tired head makes with a thing that one it be bargained with. When the clock in my mouth told me 2:47, I had the sense of standing in the vault, though I was not. I didn't put my feet on the floor. I didn't go to the door. I waited like a man who's been told to hold, and I held. I dreamed a thin quiet walking down my hall on bare feet that didn't make a sound, and I felt very clear that a person had passed into my kitchen and put their hand on my table and stood for as long as it takes a kettle to heat. I kept my mouth shut. There is not much to say about it, except that not answering, which had been a choice the first night, had become the only thing I knew how to do. In the morning I went to the door and found the letter. It was a printout. Do not answer in sensible caps. Below it, smaller. We are trying to reach everyone. The smaller sentence had the feel of an apology you make to a crowd in a public place, gentle and short and hopeless. I laughed once like a cough. I folded it the way a person folds a letter because I couldn't think what else to do with my hands. I put it in the drawer where you keep coupons and a tape measure whose end is bent. At work, the lab director called a meeting nobody wanted. We stood spaced awkward in the loading bay because the advisory still kept us out of rooms without fans. He read from a sheet. Avoid the inlet. Do not greet anyone at your door during overnight hours. Keep windows shut. Report symptoms. Headache, metallic taste, pressure in the ears, pressure at the joints. They're being cautious, he said when a guy from physics muttered. We ask our students to be cautious all the time. We should do the same. You ever see a door that doesn't get opened if someone knocks? Physics said. Storm warnings used to be words, the director said. Now they send graphics. And if the graphics look like other graphics we've seen, we follow them. We're good animals. We follow shapes. Is it the refinery? A woman from biology said. They didn't say it was anything, the director said. They used a lot of provisional language. They think it's something without numbers yet. I listened to the words provisional and numbers and taste of metal and felt better and worse at the same time. Better because other people had been told things too. Worse because other people's being told didn't change the printer. After the meeting, I went to the vault and the steel door stuck like you would expect if the air wasn't tea itself. I shouldered it open and felt the draft around my knees like a dog that wants to press the side of its head against your shin. I told myself to smile at the feeling. I told myself that it was the normal course of air in a cramped space. The day ran away with small things. A pipe trap under a sink clogged with hair and chalk. A student locked out of an office, a sensor mount that had worked itself loose and needed the gentleness that comes with keeping a thing from slipping while you tighten it. Work was a relief when it came in hand-sized tasks. Work vanished when a machine asked me to wait on it. It was when I waited that my mind ran along the grooves the printer had cut. At 2:47, I stood at the door of the vault and didn't put my hand on it. I stood to the side and let the air do its thinking. HOLD came. The barograph took its step. Do not answer. This time the thin quiet came for longer, and I felt for the first time like the thin quiet was not only the passing but the presence. That silence itself could fill up a person the way water does. The drum rattled its trick while I remembered that trick was supposed to be impossible, delivered. The stone in my pocket had warmed to my fingers and left a wet patch where the sweat had wicked out to meet it. I took it out and set it on the paper again. It looked like a paperweight. It looked like a habit. By Friday, the advisory had turned into closures. The elementary school across the road sent kids home at noon with bags of salty crackers and low voices repeating instructions given to their teachers. The grocery store put a note on the door about reduced hours and a different note on the porta potty they set up after their plumbing went sideways last summer. The note read, "Please don't use this today," which is a sentence that told a story even before you filled in the blanks. It rained, the kind of rain that doesn't smell like anything because the air thing is done, and it won, to give you the old summer smell of wet tar or worm dirt. The students went home if they had homes to go to, and the ones who didn't stayed in the commons and watched a movie with their heads against the back of chairs, and it looked how all commons look during a storm when the power doesn't go out. All the while, the lab clock pushed its minute hand to the right, steady as a man chewing. I left early enough to do the whole routine before 2:47. I put my trash out because the schedule had changed, and now they said they would come at odd hours to keep the trucks out of school pickups. I wrote a note and taped it to my door. Knock in the day. It was a stupid little note. The tape stuck because tape likes a clean door, and my door had the look of a door I take care of because it is the thing I can take care of. I turned my phone off because I didn't want to see any pictures anybody would send me that felt like the neighbor S picture. The window made a double sound when the wind moved it in its frame. Pipes in the wall clicked when the hot water line cooled and pushed a tiny bit of air through a coupler that didn't tee like itself. At 2:47, the sound in the hall shifted, like the floorboards remembered they were independent boards laid against each other and not a slab. Nothing knocked. There was, in its place, a movement in the hall, like somebody working a key into a lock they knew. I sat on the edge of my bed with my hand on my knee. I counted my breaths in a small way. The air had that dry, wet trick to it, and I felt the old wound in my shoulder say its slow piece. We're here, we're here, we're here. I waited. I did not answer. I did not open. The movement in the hall stopped in the kitchen, then where the bathroom door is, then where the closet is, then back in the kitchen again, the way a person who comes to your house for the first time learns the lay of it by habit, their feet telling them corners, even when they think they are paying attention to you. It went away, or the idea of going away happened, and the air felt larger. Delivered is a word you can put anywhere, the back of a truck, the printer in the vault, the face of your own door, where you put a hand flat and feel the cold on your palm as if somebody on the other side is doing the same. Saturday, the water ran brown at first and cleared, then ran bright and smelled like the part of winter when your nose gives up. The paper boy didn't come, not because he didn't have a paper, there's always a paper, but because somebody had told him not to be out. I went to the vault even though I didn't have a shift. The chair sat there quiet as if somebody had made a deal with it in my absence. The paper on the drum had fresh smoke, which it shouldn't have, which meant that either the instrument had developed a mind that didn't need my hand to feed it, or that I had forgotten I had fed it before I left on Friday. Forgetting is a small cousin of lying, and I hate both, even when the only person you could lie to is yourself. There was a new thing on the monitor. The solver had left its straight face and got nervous. It had plotted events at distances that made no sense, and depths that ran to a line of dashes, and then a number, and then dashes again, like a person swearing under their breath and stopping themselves. The trace had added a drift, a tiny incremental tilt that meant either the table had gone out of level or the earth had. It's frightening to see that on a table. It's worse to see it in a person. I took the level out from the bottom drawer and set it on the table. The bubble made the case that the table and I had returned to our old center. I put the level away and told the instrument to mind itself, and sat in the chair feeling stupid for having said anything out loud. When I left, I took the Riverstone with me without meaning to. I felt the emptiness in my pocket later, and not the weight. And I went back in my mind to make sure I hadn't left a thing where a thing doesn't belong. It was in my pocket, where I had put it by a motion so familiar my hand didn't tell my head about it. A person who keeps a smooth stone in a pocket is not somebody I thought I was. The kids know how to do that. They pick up things and keep them, and the thing changes their idea of that day, and then the day changes back and the rock ends in a drawer. I haven't kept a token since I wore a belt with a buckle on it that had a word I don't wear anymore. I didn't tell anybody about any of it. There wasn't an anybody. The people who wanted my voice wanted it for drains and thermostats. I don't have a friend who would hear a phrase like "do not answer" and not laugh in my face. A person needs a person who will not laugh all the time in their face. I had the vault. Sunday I was supposed to be off. The advisory gave the town a hushed voice. Church let out early because the pastor had lost his place and drained the juice out of whatever he had planned. The market shut at noon for restocking, though nobody said with what. The flags on the little mailboxes rode up and down because the kids would not be told about the word "do not." Not in a way that would keep them from playing with a physical object that shouted out for a finger to lift it and let it fall. At 2:47 the world did its trick. It does it whether or not you stand and watch. I stood. The movement came in below knee level like a low tide and made me think of the way an old dog limps and still gets there. HOLD, I thought, and hated that I was thinking it before the pen could write it, as if I'd gotten ahead of a machine whose job was to get ahead of me. Then a small change. The printer clattered early. The caps came quick. Do not answer. After that, a second line, if greeted, return ungreeted. It was the first time that anything got added. Added is the wrong word. Footnoted. It had the feel of a person's carefulness around language, the way people turn a sentence around until the obligation lands on nobody in particular. It made my stomach feel the way it does when you row on a ferry and the ferry tells your feet more about the water than your eyes want to know. That night, the knock came. It came the way knocks used to, polite and not too loud, because the hour admits you know what you're doing. 3 makes sense when you do it, a soft pause. Then a 4th, which is less polite because it means to make sure. I stood and counted my breaths. I stood and touched the table because the letter about the day before had said the thing to do was not to do. The 4th knock was softer, like the person was new to their decision. I didn't move. The knobs on doors are made for hands. Everything in a house is shaped for greeting. If you had told me a month before that a social act and a physical act could weld themselves so tight it hurts, I would have said this is a college town, not that kind of town. I didn't move. The knock went away. It moved around the corners of the halls like a mouse you only know is there because the cat looks interested. Monday, the director assigned shifts like a person tries to play whack-a-mole at a carnival you done tea like. The HVAC on the older part of the building went into a sulk. The new lab had micro cracks in the paint where humidity shouldn't play. He told me to prioritize the vault for the next few days because the grant had deliverables, and he needed something in a report that didn't read like 2 lines of apologies. He did not say we should keep the vault open after 9. He said to the extent the vault is weatherproof, you should maintain weatherproofing. I could be alone with a thing and not be lonely. That's one of the reasons they kept me on after the downsizing. If you have men who say it's fine to be alone with a thing, you put them where the things are and leave the togetherness to men who use their hands to explain things. All day I kept my hands busy. All night I stood as close as a person can stand to a door without putting their hand on it. The knock came Tuesday at 9, early, a civil hour, because the new advisory said nothing about day knocks. The knock paused, waiting for the shape of a sentence to appear on the other side and give it permission to open. A second knock would have come if I had said anything. I said nothing. I put my palm on the table because it needed to touch something, and the table would not lie to me about its temperature. The knock paused and resumed at 2:47. The printer didn't need to tell me what to do. The second line had made a groove in me. If greeted, return ungreeted. I held. The printer said, delivered, and went quiet. Somewhere inside me, a person who grew up being told to be polite and meet people as eyes and say hello, ground their teeth and blame me for forgetting the rules. I didn't forget. I set them down. By Wednesday, the water tasted ordinary again if you ran it long enough. The sky came clear and the campus took back its brightness. People moved in the hall like the stems of letters. Someone laughed too loud, because when you have been quiet, you will be too loud for a while to prove to yourself you're allowed to be loud. The vault had the small smell of hot dust. In the afternoon, I opened the steel door to air it. and felt as I opened it the tiny pressure of a hand on the other side. It is possible that was a trick of air, because pressure is what happens when disturbances have nowhere to go. It is possible I knew better. At 2:47 there came no letters. That was new. The pen did its quiet, and the thin quiet did its footsteps, and the printer did not cough to life. I didn't know whether to be sad or grateful. Then, while I was leaning against the cinder block, the printer hammered out one short line like a bird pecking at the lid of a jar. Served. I told myself that was a synonym the machine had pulled out of a hat. The word sat wrong in the room. It was a word a person hates, the word that says a thing has been done to you and there is a record of it now. I went home and found a slip. Not under the door, on the rug. My rug had lines from a vacuum I'd run that morning, and the slip sat across two of them, a crosshatch that made me think of the smoked paper the drum used. The slip was blank. The blankness had more to say than a word would have. I did not lift it with my hand. I bent down and slid a newspaper under it and carried it like you carry a spider you mean to take outside. I took it to the sink and ran water on it, because water is still the first thing a person uses when a thing inside a house does not make sense. The paper wet up and ran grey with printer ribbon ink. I could not see when it was dry. The sink smelled like battery. Thursday, the advisory got soft at the edges. People got brave and talked to their delivery drivers and set porch chairs out again, because there's only so long you can ignore a porch that asks to be sat in. The kids lifted flags on all the boxes and ran away. I put mine down with more care than I meant to. There are ways to be brave that are just a person going through the motions of their old life. And then there's other bravery I couldn't tell which I had. At the vault, I found the drum had written in the night while no one had been there. The letters were not letters. The line had walked itself into a pencil sketch of the hallway outside the vault door, and then, as if remembering the lesson of the second line it had written in that stiff, careful hand, I had first seen, "If greeted, return, ungreeted." That day, I left the door open because the air asked for it. It felt like the moment in a conversation where both people have said what they think they needed to say, and now the silence sits, not hostile, not a relief. I kept the open door in my sightline and did little chores. The world, if you pushed a little, would still give you little chores. Friday brought heat. You could smell the pitch in the blacktop. The fan in the vault sounded healthy again because I'd learned the right amount of oil and when to wipe it off and let the bearing be. The lab director came down with a lemon candy he'd pinched from a bowl and said, "How's our underground friend?" I said the fan ran fine and I had plans to order a filter. "About the data," he said. "I got an email from a person wanting to know why we've been sending blanks and dashes. Is there a software patch we missed?" "There's probably a patch we missed," I said. "You always say that as comfort," he said. "It usually is," I said. He had the decency not to ask me to explain the printer, which he could see from where he stood had printed things without a name. He had the sense to leave a little gift of not knowing, the way a person leaves a casserole on a porch without ringing the bell. I wanted to thank him and I didn't. He patted the hood of the UPS like it was a car. When he left, his handprints stayed in the dust, and then the dust took them back. At 2:47 a noise came I hadn't heard before. It was like a breath pressed against a slit. It was like a pair of lips just this side of the metal. It made the sound metal makes when it decides to speak in a voice it doesn't really have. My mouth went dry. The pen didn't write HOLD. The printer didn't say do not. It printed one word only, like it had had enough conversational English and wanted to try for anatomy. "Here?" it asked. The question mark leaned like a tired man. I thought of old phones on walls with spiraled cords that let you walk into the next room while you talked, your voice doing work in two spaces. The question hung. It was not an instruction. It was something else. The door was still a door. If a thing asked me to hear, I could hear. I could hear as much as listening makes of hearing. The sound came through my bones more than my ears. It had a shape that was not music. A long shape, like a corridor. A thin shape, like a string plucked a long time ago that still finds ways to hum. Behind it, the fan made itself useful and broke the sound into slices and made the walls look like they breathed. The printer didn't say delivered, it said received. Saturday I stayed home. I set a chair by the door like a man in the old stories who sits up late with a song in his mouth to keep him from sleeping. No song came. The clock rolled right past 2:47 as if time could be any other thing than itself. I put my hand on my thigh, where the old ache is. The knock came soft, and then like a hand forgetting its own strength, and then, after a pause that had that same shape of long and thin, it came not at the door, but at the window in the kitchen, the knock of a nail head against glass. I went to it because the idea of glass kept me less obedient than the metal. When I got there, the window fogged and cleared in a pattern that looked like the letters of a man, S name written by a person who wasn't used to writing my name. I wiped the fog and it returned. I warmed the glass with my breath and thought of the instruction and the second instruction and whatever the printer had decided was new enough to ask. I stood there. I did not answer. The fog dried and the window returned to being a window, and I saw myself in it, the cut of my mouth like I'd bitten a word clean in two. Sunday I went to the vault. I don't know what I thought I could do there. I took the river stone out of my pocket and put it where I had put it the first day, on the lip of the paper, where it could keep a page from shifting under air. The printer had a new thing waiting. It had printed 3 words and then stopped. They will knock. The paper had torn at the stop because the machine had pulled it hard and then decided not to risk a jam. I put my finger to the tear and felt the roughness of the edge. The drum was still. The band fattened with wind because a storm had started to crawl in from the ocean, and the airport feed said the wind was going to switch in the early morning. The hangar doors on the airfield would clap and the lights would crawl. I could have gone home and put in earplugs and pretended I was a teenager. I could have sat in the loading bay with the door open and let whatever air was out there go through me like a song with no words. What I did was stay. I made a cup of coffee in the little pot that always tastes like its old cups, burned and sweet. And I leaned back and set my feet against the cabinet and counted the clicks of the fan. I was counting when the barograph took a step that was not small. When the barograph steps like that, the air has opinions. The lung of the vault went shallow. The lights in the strip overhead flickered in a way that had nothing to do with the room we were in, and everything to do with wires over our heads in other rooms. I stood and the chair rolled back and made a sound that told me my oil had been enough if oil could be a measure of goodness. I walked to the door and set my hand near the latch. I did not put it on. The knock came. It was a polite knock, but it had words. It had words the way a knock does when you're heard words long enough that the shape is muscle. The printer clicked a little. I thought about smiling. It was a thought like a leaf in rain. I didn't smile. I put my mouth near the crack at the side where the door meets the frame, and it isn't a perfect marriage, and I said nothing. I did not greet. I waited until the waiting felt like a new kind of work my body hadn't trained for. It went away. I will not dress it up. It went away the way a person backs down a hallway and goes down a set of stairs and puts their hand on the rail. The drum picked up. It wrote the long corridor again, and then a string of little footstep spaces, and then, in that stiff, careful hand, last line, good. The printer exhaled with it, and the room reset. The fan sounded like a fan. The hum found its lane. The barograph did not step further down. Monday, the advisory fell quiet. No more texts, no more notes. The cold room in biology hit its set point without any of us coaxing it. The kids came out and slapped flags down and down again. The mail came and had the kinds of bills I always get. The director sent me a note about the filter, approved, the world rounded off. I ate eggs and they tasted like eggs. The pepper shook out in a normal way. The fridge made its old hum and not the thought of hum. The day had its right weight in my hand. I waited for 2:47, same as a person waits for a train they done planned to board. The trains run whether you want to ride them. The difference is whether you stand on the platform. I stood on the platform and did not lift my hand. Nothing came. Not a knock. Not the thin, quiet waking. Then the printer chirped, a sound I had not heard it make before, like paper thinking about itself. One line came through, "Window hours end." That was it. It sounded like a policy a clerk would sigh while they peeled a sign off a door. It sounded like relief if you are the kind of person to hear relief in a door closing. I took the Riverstone home and put it on my counter. I didn't put it in the drawer with the tape and the coupons. I set it where I set my keys, because it was a thing that had acted like a key. For the first time since the printer began, I slept like a man who has moved lumber all day, the kind of sleep where if the house makes noises, you let the house be a house. Morning light came up wrong on account of clouds, and then came up right, and then I was late to the vault, and then I showed up and found the pen had written neat little fences all night, ordinary as a pulse. The world went back to doing what it does, which is pushing its routines like a shove broom. An email came that asked for an explanation. We sent one without any names in it, a paragraph about noise and night maintenance and the storm. I changed a belt. I ordered a part. I sat and oiled the squeak in the chair that hadn't bothered anybody but me. The lab director came in and put a lemon candy on the counter like a benediction. He said nothing and then a little something. "Sometimes the air has a day," he said. "It does," I said. "Keep the vault in shape," he said. "I will," I said. "It would be clean to leave it there. It would be the kind of ending the town likes, with a degree of faint humor and the suggestion that we all went on." People did. They bought their crackers and they wrote their reminders on index cards, and they gave a space to the parts of the day when the plumbing knocked because the line was cooling or the neighbor walked heavy. I did the same. I left my door shut at night, not out of fear, but because we had all gotten used to the idea of night being the hours you don't invite anybody in. Somewhere a week later, when the wind came around wrong again and the smell of the harbor did that thing where it remembers what it has in it and decides to tell you, I stood in the vault and put my palm to the steel without thinking, the way a man feels the hood of a car to see if it has been running. The steel was my temperature, because this is what happens when you keep your hand there long enough. The printer woke and printed 3 more words, unbothered, in that patient, stiff hand that looked like a person healing from a break. "Thank you," it said. Then nothing. The drum took up its regular fence. The barograph kept its temper. The fan cut the air into slices no thinner than a man can breathe. That night I slept with the window cracked because it smelled like summer, and the storm had gone up country and left our streets clean. The flag on my neighbor's box lifted and dropped as the breeze went. Across the hall, a toddler knocked at his own door with both hands and laughed, and nobody told him not to because it was day, and there was no reason to. When I stood in my kitchen in the morning light, I saw on the table where a person would put their hand if they leaned in to listen, a round spot where the grain had lifted faint. I pressed my palm down. Cool met warm through wood. The difference between temperatures is the way we know the shape of a boundary. It wasn't a message. It wasn't anything I needed to log. I stood there until my hand stopped telling the table we belonged to different air. Then I lifted my hand and the grain lay down again like nothing had come through at all. If this story lands with you, please like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who enjoys quiet, literary horror. Comments are open. Tell me your favorite image or line.